Can you say, "This is Dr. Amanda Zelechoski"?
Why do we have to?
Just try it.
Oh, I can't.
Deep breath. Okay.
This is Dr. Amanda Zelechoski. Lindsay Malloy. Ah!
Now, wait, say Dr. Lindsay Malloy.
Dr. Lindsay Malloy.
No, come back.
This is Dr. Lindsay Malloy. Welcome to the Parenting Podcast.
One more time.
And then after that, can we have a candy twist?
No.
Please, Mommy.
Okay, ready?
Pandemic Parenting Podcast.
Excellent.
Welcome to the Pandemic Parenting Podcast. I'm Dr. Amanda Zelechoski.
And I'm Dr. Lindsay Malloy. We are two psychologists, scholars, and moms, and together we co-founded Pandemic Parenting.
We're here to share science-based research and help all who care for kids navigate this challenging time together. Please note that the information contained in this podcast and on the Pandemic Parenting website are intended for educational purposes only. Nothing discussed in this podcast or provided on the website are intended to be a substitute for professional psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No doctor-patient relationship is formed between the hosts or guests of this podcast and listeners. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health or medical provider, we encourage you to seek one in your area. We all know that parenting comes with joys and challenges. And for parents of children with disabilities, those joys and challenges look, well, different. Whether your child is neurodivergent, has a chronic health condition, or lives with another form of disability, you know that the journey with your child has additional twists and turns than that of other parents or caregivers. Many of those discrepancies became even more apparent throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. We've been wanting to do this episode for a long time, since we launched Pandemic Parenting, both our nonprofit organization and this podcast. We've heard the exhaustion and desperation from parents and caregivers of children with varying disabilities, and the screams into the abyss about their struggles and needs that have felt unmet or invisible to others before, during, and likely far beyond the pandemic. I'm one of those parents, having a child with a long history of medical issues and vulnerabilities that meant having to be extra careful and recognizing how much people often don't get how hard it was to navigate lockdowns and quarantines when your child is at increased risk for a host of really scary outcomes. But we wanted to do this conversation a bit differently than our other episodes. So this episode is the first in a two-part series examining the intersection between parenting and disability. Typically, we interview guest experts whose research or clinical practice focuses on the topic we're discussing. But today, we turn to the critical expertise that is parents' lived experiences. You'll hear our producer, Carmen Vincent, and myself talk with two parents of children with disabilities. First, you'll meet Jennifer, a mother of an 8-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son who, in her words, happens to have nonverbal autism. In the second half of this episode, we talk with Nisha, a mother of twin 7-year-old boys and a 3-year-old daughter who is battling a complex congenital heart disease. Later this month, we'll release another episode where we speak with multiple parents with disabilities of their own. Before we dive into this discussion, I want to give a special thank you to our producer, Carmen Vincent, for her support in crafting these episodes. As someone who lives with multiple invisible disabilities, Carmen was instrumental in making sure we respectfully and compassionately amplified people's truths and authentic lived experiences. So now, on to the conversation. I've known Jennifer and Nisha for over 25 years, which is mathematically impossible since we're all still in our 20s. Just kidding. I'm so grateful, though, that they were each willing to share their honest perspectives as moms who, like all of us parents, are figuring it out as they go. Of course, these are the experiences of two parents with children who have different types of disabilities, and their circumstances and approaches to parenting may look different than yours. But we hope that their stories resonate with you. I know they did with me. And there were parts of each conversation that brought me to tears and made me feel seen and understood in some of the hardest parts of my parenting journey.
It's okay to understand that the life you think your child may have is completely changed. And the best thing that ever happened to me was a girl I was working with, her son was nonverbal autism. So I've really kind of leaned on her a lot. She was like, feel your feelings. It's okay to be upset. It's okay for your child to be upset if they're at that age where they can understand that something's different, but they don't quite grasp it. But the big thing is that your child's path is just going to look different. That's it. It's just going to look different. It could be infinitely better than a life you could have ever dreamed of. And then she sent me a list of famous people, famous scientists, celebrities, whatever it be, that were all diagnosed with autism. Oh boy, did that make me feel a million times better,
right?
Because they were people I respected.
Yes.
When my son was first diagnosed, his pediatrician, he said, "What's wrong? What are you doing?" Because he could tell I wanted to cry, but I just was holding it together. And he goes, "If you want to cry, cry." And he said, "It's okay to mourn the life you thought your child was going to have, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be less of a life. It's just going to be different than you initially planned." And so for him just to validate that it's okay to feel what I feel. And I think just in general, as a parent, a lot of times we don't feel it's okay to feel a certain way because we need to be the strong or we need to present something towards society. I mean, my little man is just the happiest go lucky. I mean, just doesn't meet somebody he doesn't like. I mean, it does take a while for him to warm up to somebody, but he doesn't immediately run stranger danger. He's just like, "Oh, a new friend. Well, let's get to know you," type of a thing. And I feel like my husband and I have learned so much just from my son about appreciating the little things, because we notice he gets so hyper focused on something and he's just in it and he's there. And it's just like, I never would have thought that this mop was this magical, but I love that he's so like, "I got a mop," and he's just happy as can be. And I feel like he's teaching us patience, because that's the one thing my husband, anytime anybody's like, "What is your fault?" Husband and I both are like, "Patience. We ain't got time for that. We ain't got time for patience." But I feel like that's why we have Vaughn, is patience, looking at things from a different perspective, different point of view. Looking at things in ways I never would have. And he's nonverbal. Could you imagine if he was verbal, what we could learn? I mean, just that alone is amazing to me. But with autism, the umbrella is so huge. In the process of all of this and my son's diagnosis, we discovered my husband is autistic. We had no clue. Wow. I just thought he was super smart and liked to talk to himself and saw things in patterns. That's it.
Talking about your daughter, I'm really curious, like, how has she navigated growing up with her little brother, and how do you talk to her about autism?
In the beginning, we weren't sure what to explain to her and what would she be able to grasp. And the biggest thing I found is I listened to my son's therapists. And they all said the same thing. When she starts asking questions, that's the perfect time. Before that, just act like this is normal. It's just, no big deal. She still was young enough at the time. She was, I think, 5.5 or 6 when he was diagnosed. So, I mean, she was still very impressionable. She is very much my mini me. She needs to be the center of attention a lot. So I knew there was going to be a balancing act I needed to do with her. And eventually it did get to the point where she ended up having a breakdown. I walk in and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "You like brother more than me." And I'm like, "Where did you get that?" "Well, you spend more time with brother. You do more stuff with brother." So that is when we used that opportunity to open the door and explain to her, we have the same expectations for your brother as we do for you. The difference, though, is that brother needs extra help to achieve those things. And now she can spot my son about to melt down before we do now. She can see it. Then shortly after that, she was diagnosed with dyslexia. So I felt like she embraced that because she was already understanding that her brother didn't see things a little bit different. And I have heard her numerous times telling school friends, things like that, "Me and my brother are different, and that doesn't make us any less. And if we were all the same, life would just be boring." And I'm like, "Well, parenting check for me on that one." If she, yes, child, yes, you are correct. So we didn't necessarily change the way we parent. We just have to do it differently depending on the child. I needed to learn to get over how other people would perceive him. And that's been my biggest journey through all this. I am very much I don't care what other people think of myself. And that took a long time to get to that point because I was the complete opposite growing up. I needed everybody to like me. I needed, I had to have all the friends and everything. But now with my son, especially since he's getting so much older, his tics and things like that are a lot more noticeable. And the looks you get from other parents, that doesn't bother me. Whatever you don't understand, that's fine. That's okay. You don't understand. However, we did have an incident, and it's the only time I have ever had an issue out in public with my child. And we were on a road trip. We were driving to California, and he, like I said, he's very happy. He's very outgoing kid, just laughing, giggling all the time. But he started to have a meltdown. And I realized he was having the meltdown because the truck stop we stopped at was so loud inside. And I didn't grab his headphones out of the car. So I said, well, let's just check out real quick. Let me check out real quick and, I'll get him to the car. No big deal. Nobody in the store was even paying attention to him because it was one of those huge, giant truck stops, whatever. Everyone just, kid, whatever. No big deal. The lady checking me out was probably in her late 60s. And she said, oh, is that your son? I said, yeah. She goes, when we were raising our children, we never allowed our children to act like that in public. Oh I froze for a minute and I was like, do I cause a scene? Because Amanda can attest. I can throw a scene if I need to. And finally I said to the lady, I was like, I understand that. I understand what you're saying, but you also need to understand that my son is having a meltdown because he has an issue processing loud noises. He has auditory issues. And she said, well, still paid left. Because the thing was, I felt like I didn't need to explain to her that he was autistic because it's none of her damn business. But at the same time, I felt it was my responsibility that she needed to educate herself instead of making a snap judgment because you don't know. I hear a lot from other autistic parents that it's really hard to parent a child with autism outside of your home because unlike something like Down syndrome, it's not physically noticeable right off the bat.
Yeah, I just resonate with so much of what you said. It was reminding me of an incident too that I haven't thought about in years, where similarly a woman in a restaurant made several comments about how, loud my son was being. And finally, I just said, he just finished 2 years of speech therapy to even be able to do that. And so you have no idea what's going on for kids. And that for me, that's a win that he was saying all those things in public. So
of course.
So it's just making me wonder for you and just, your thoughts for other parents. How do you choose these times to step up and advocate versus walk away? It can be a daily decision-making process.
You have no
right. Right. And so and there's so much of this parenting journey in general that's just so exhausting.
Exactly.
But then parenting children with all of these different complexities to the way that we move through the world.
So I hear tons of horror stories about out in public. A lot of parents who have chosen to keep their children home all the time rather than deal with it. And as long as I've been alive, at least for life, I want all the experiences in the world. That's just me. And I want that for my children. So he was only 18 months when he was diagnosed, and which is kind of rare, but also being a boy, they tend to look for it more. I've also been somebody who's been able to read people really well for the most part. I can usually tell whether I'm wasting my breath. Most people don't say anything. We've been really blessed. You get a lot of side glances and things like that. And then you have people that my husband always says, it's really ballsy if they're wrong. But a lot of people come up to my son and go, is he autistic? Because my son does display a lot of very typical, if you've been around autistic kids, he does display the overexcitement. He yells, makes a lot of, and they're happy noises, but they're very loud. Or if somebody is talking too loud next to him, he immediately puts his hands up next to his ears, those kinds of things. Then I had a coworker who has a almost 6-year-old who's nonverbal autistic. So being able to rely on her, or at least her journey. So her journey became more homeopathic. She found that certain diets and stuff kind of alleviated certain symptoms within him. And that became extremely difficult in the beginning of the pandemic when everyone was panic buying. And we experienced that a little bit because my son is a picky eater. They're actually working on it with him at school now to kind of doing food therapy and stuff, because his is a texture thing, like certain textures he doesn't like. But if he's, let's say, only eating 7 things, the beginning of this pandemic hit, you couldn't get those 7 things. You know, you couldn't get some of this stuff. And especially with her, he was on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet, and she couldn't get half that stuff. So he was eating the same meal over and over and over and over because it was the one thing she could get during the pandemic. And it was the most frustrating thing to see during this entire pandemic was disability and how they weren't even thought of during this whole thing. Anybody, kid to adult, it didn't matter.
Well, and especially when it's probably taken years to sort of figure out that right, perfect diet or strategies or therapies or things that we finally figured out what works, and now we don't have access to it.
Exactly.
So I'm wondering, like, what else did you find for you and your family was also a struggle in the pandemic?
Well, so Vaughn's journey specifically was very interesting because he was diagnosed at 18 months. He got in-home therapies for speech therapy and motor skills. Then at age 3, he can start attending early childhood school out here. So he turned 3 and went to school for a week, lockdown. He only had a week of organized structure of what to expect in class. And then they were expecting, or I should say the education system was expecting him to sit in front of a computer and listen to somebody he only just met for 3 hours a day. We had to literally put him in a high chair, lock him in with his favorite snacks to even get him to sit there. And his teacher at the time was a wonderful woman. She kind of got it. She just was like, we will meet at 8:00. We'll do story time. And then we'll meet like one time a day. They would do like a science project and she'd do it through, but it was always something real flashy and she'd always make it bright and exciting. And then they would have story time at the end of the day because that was the routine at school. So she was only requiring them to be on Zoom for, 15 minutes, 3 times a day. And even then that was kind of pushing it for little man because he's very, very active. Very active. But she basically had emailed all us parents and said, look, if your child regressed, if your child didn't learn anything, whatever, it's okay. My job is to get them back on track. That's my job. So don't you worry about it. Don't you stress on it. We will make it happen. But I think, especially with the pandemic, when you have any child, I mean, even my 8-year-old was like, I cannot sit in front of the screen and try and learn right now. And this is from a child who loves school. So I left it up to her. I said, when we go back to school, virtual or in person? She said, in person. She's like, Mommy, I will wear the mask. I will wash my hands 1,000,000 times a day if it means I can go in person. Okay, that's what we'll do then. So the pandemic has not been easy. Having one child that's neurotypical, one that's neurodivergent, and especially with him, he's a typical boy in a lot of respects. And it's like, oh, what's that? I'm going to put it in my mouth. I don't care that I just picked it up off the floor. It's that kind of thing. Things that I didn't necessarily worry about other than, ew, that's gross, dude. Don't do that. To, oh my God, don't do that. It was that drastic change within us as parents having to learn how to deal with it, but also try not to freak out the kids because we're like, hey, don't do that. It's kind of like, I can't.
Yeah. And I feel like one thing I've learned being part of the pandemic parenting team is, gosh, how much pressure there is on parents to make the exact right decision every time, all the time.
Every hour, every day with zero guidance, which is parenting anyway. And now 100%. In a pandemic, right?
Exactly. And I wonder if having a child with a disability puts an extra critical eye on you.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Could you talk about that?
Even not in a pandemic. In everyday society, you deal with, like I said, you've dealt with people who do the side-eye glances, but don't say anything. You have the people that say things under the breath. You have the people who say something. And I had to reach a point where I needed to tell myself, they're just ignorant. And some people you can tell are ignorant by choice, and some just genuinely don't know. And those are the people that I tend to at least try to educate a little bit. I don't want to make them feel bad, because I feel like the minute you make somebody feel bad for reacting a certain way or expressing something, they're not going to listen to your feedback if you make them feel bad. So it's been frustrating.
Absolutely. And
frustrating.
There's such a difficult dynamic to balance, because there's this pushback in the disability community and in other communities that it's not our job to educate people on what it's like.
And there are a lot of parents in the disabled community that don't feel it is their job to educate people. And I 100% respect it. It's not somebody else's job to educate you. But if you feel called, like I do sometimes, I feel called to just casually, hey, again, don't come at it from a place of anger or hate or offense, but calmness, and just be like, hey, just so you know, just want to let you know, here's a heads up. But it's not my job, 100%. And I totally understand anybody that feels that way, that it is not their job to educate. But I also feel like, and again, me personally, I feel like there's so much misconception around disability, so much misinformation. So I feel like that's where my call to sometimes educate individuals comes from. So I think it's an individual choice.
Right. I think it's also, like you said, it's not people's responsibility. And even if and when you feel called to step into that role at times, I do think it's really important, just as a general sort of self-care reminder for parents, of the idea that, Dr. Christina Grange taught us a bit about in a previous episode around weathering and feeling weathered, and that it is okay on certain days to say, yes, I feel it's important for me to do this, but not today. I am exhausted, or I have been fighting a battle with my child today. And you know what? Not today. And that is okay to intentionally step out of it at times to take care of yourself.
Exactly. And it's so funny, because when I became a parent, the first thing my mom said was, you're going to learn this phrase very, very well. It's called pick and choose your battles. And we just had this issue the other day. My son is in I must pull everything out of everywhere, and then I'm going to make piles and organize them myself. But it's throughout the entire kitchen, wrapping through, the living room and the dining room. And I just kind of went, you're happy. I don't care. Like, it just was like, you're happy. This is fine. You're content. You're loving life. We can't step on the floor anywhere, but you are happy. You know what? I don't care.
And that
we can choose the battle.
That's right. Which is the lesson I too take away from this pandemic, that they're just every given day in a particular hour, it was right. What is the next right thing for me to do right now? And these other things can wait.
In the second half of the pandemic, to me, has really been more about, okay, now how do we take care of your mental health? Because if you aren't healthy, then you can't help your children. So it became that balancing act at that point. So my husband and I started doing this thing where every 3 months, one of us would have a night at a hotel room away from the kids, and the other one had the kids just to do whatever it was. Like my husband binged watched Netflix and like true crime documentaries and just laid in the hotel room, just like, vegging out,
Can you talk about that, like the importance of respite, especially for parents of kids with disabilities? Because we talk so much in many of our pandemic parenting conversations about just parent guilt, mom guilt, all of those things that exist anyway in parenting. But now layer on top for a parent of a child with a disability, like talk about the importance of respite.
So especially when you're newly diagnosed, you really, at least for me and my husband, we really went into survival mode. I went through the bad place because I'm the type of person that it's just the way I'm wired. I always go to the worst possible scenario first and work my way back. And I find working my way back calms me down, gives me better perspective, and it's helped me process things. But you constantly hear people, super mom, boss mom, all these catchy Instagram hashtags, And
I don't know how you do it all, right? Yes.
Yeah, that's my favorite. I get that a lot from my single girlfriends. Those are the fun ones. But the thing is that especially when you look at social media, when people are basing on how successful you are as a parent on social media, that's when I get a lot of those girls, especially during the pandemic. I don't know how many girlfriends of mine were like, I don't know how you're doing this with kids. And my response was, I don't have a choice. You just make it work. However that is, and it's going to look different for everyone. But the big thing I was learning was I was not happy, especially during the pandemic, because I felt like I was failing as a parent. I don't know what else I could have done, but I just felt like it because Joe Schmo, my friend over here on Facebook, just made breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the shapes of caterpillars and dogs and hearts. And they also did their own science project and their craft project and did school. And my child's getting straight A's and they're doing this. And you're like, I kept them alive. Like that was the running joke during the pandemic with a bunch of my parent friends. We all were like, were they alive today? Cool. Did they get in a shower? Double bonus. You get an extra cookie today. I think we all had to, as parents, redefine what was considered successful, especially during a pandemic. So it became not only just me and my husband doing our little hotel room just for a night, but like my husband will listen to a podcast now. When the kids go to bed, he, for about a half hour, listens to a podcast, then goes to bed. I'm a little different because it takes me a long time to unwind. And during the day, I get worked up by all these different little things stacking up. And even though they're not bothering me, I know I'm going to sit for at least an hour after the kids go to bed, thinking about all of these things, because that's just how I'm wired. So how do I turn that into self-care? Well, I just started taking baths. Literally, I'm like, well, at least I'm relaxing thinking about all these things. I'm in a nice bath. I started thinking about those things less. I stopped overanalyzing. Like I would acknowledge what happened for the day. Be like, man, I probably could have handled that better. Cool. Now we know, move on. And then it became, okay, now I'm reading and now I'm doing this. And I think the biggest thing is not just making sure a lot of us are taking the time out for ourselves, but we also need to readily accept and understand that we need to give ourselves grace and permission to mess up and not get it right. And we need to understand that all our journeys are going to be different. And so being kind to ourselves is a huge self-care act that a lot of people don't view as self-care. You're taking buckets of water and trying to stop the sinking ship, not understanding that myself and my husband also needed to take care of ourselves. We felt selfish going, well, you're the adults. You understand what's going on around you. Why do you need a break? Your children don't understand this. They're having a hard time wrapping their mind around it. They don't need a break. I think the best way to describe it is during the pandemic, really needed to accept that I had emotions. My emotions were valid. The way I handled things may not have been best in certain scenarios, but you didn't know until you did it. You know what I mean? It was kind of that trial and error, but I was beating myself up over the error part, thinking in my mind, I had to be the perfect pandemic mother. I had to just being a perfect mother, period. And I even had reservation about doing this podcast because I'm afraid of saying something that isn't right, which you've noticed through this whole thing. I've said for me. Right. And I had a long conversation with my husband about it saying, should we do this? And he's like, I think because you are not a psychologist, you are not a professor, you are not a doctor, you are not a therapist, you are just a mom. You need to do this.
Mm. And that's why
you need.
Yeah.
But again, I'm still sitting here in the back of my mind. There have been 5 or 6 sentences that I've said that I'm like, I can see where an autism mom might have a problem with what I just said, especially the grieving the life you thought. It is a very taboo thought. Some parents of children with disabilities get that concept. It's been very therapeutic. It's helped them get through it faster by accepting it and embracing it. And other parents are like, you shouldn't feel that way. They're not any less. We're not saying our children are less in any way, shape, or form. No way. No parent of a disabled child is going to tell you that they think their child is less than anybody else. So the path is just different. Yeah. It's okay. The best description I got for it was what happens when you're a football player and you've played football your entire life, you get drafted to the NFL, your first game, you break your leg, and it's a career-ending injury. You are allowed to be upset and mourn the life you thought you were going to have in the NFL. It doesn't mean it's going to be any less. You're just now going to take a different path. And for me, that was the biggest piece of advice I got that helped me, I think, the most out of anything, is because I did feel guilty that I was upset that my son was autistic. And then I thought, oh God, I'm a horrible human being. I didn't love him any less. There was no physical or emotional change other than I was upset because I don't know what this journey entails. Now I can't imagine it any different. I cannot imagine it any different. My child is hyper. He is crazy, insane. He's exhausting, but he loves life. And for somebody who wants to experience everything as much in her lifetime as possible, seeing it from a different perspective in such a small child is just the most amazing thing to witness. The playbook there is no playbook. There really isn't, because everybody's journey is so different. We had to make a playbook for ourselves and not compare our playbook to other people's playbook.
So much real-world insight and really vivid descriptions of day-to-day challenges, but also the beautiful moments that come with parenting a neurodivergent child in that conversation with Jennifer. Now we're going to hear from Nisha, a Los Angeles-based journalist who shares her perspective as a mother of a child with a high-risk medical condition.
Hi, I'm Nisha, and I'm a Los Angeles-based journalist. I'm a mother of 3 kids. I have 7-year-old twin boys, and my daughter Nyla was born in 2017 with a congenital heart disease called tetralogy of Fallot. And ever since then, everything has really been completely different than what, life was before that. As an overview, she's 3 now, and she's had 3 open heart surgeries, probably 10 to 15 other heart-related procedures. Her first surgery was when she was 6 days old. So it's kind of changed my whole perspective and the way I parent overall. I have boys, as Amanda, they're super rambunctious, I'm sure like yours are, and there's never a dull moment. One can be just sitting there still, and then the other one will come and pounce him on the head, and then all craziness breaks loose, but I've had to teach them from a very young age that they have a sister. The word that I use with them is fragile and tender, because I feel like, they're only 7. And so I choose my words very carefully with how I explain them to her for different reasons. One, I don't want them to feel afraid of her, afraid to touch her, things like that. So I've tried to kind of, for lack of a better word, dumb it down for them and just explain it to them in simpler, easy terms, because her having a disability because of her heart, it limits us as a family, even, as a whole, of what we can do, what they can do, what she can do. So it's just really changed the whole trajectory of who we are as a family and who they are also as kids just growing up. Sometimes with her, if she runs around a lot, she immediately starts sweating because her heart is constantly in overdrive. Sometimes her palms and her ankles will turn a dusty blue. And so I've already trained them to know, if sister, if you notice sister looks like she has a bruise, come and tell mom. A lot of things due to her heart, she has a hard time chewing food and swallowing food properly. So when she's feeding or when she's eating, we're at the table and I'm just laser focused on her, because I have to be prepared to, if she chokes, go into that, not panic mode, but I have to know exactly what to do. And so I've had to tell them, if you're not getting the attention that you want from me, boys, mom, I need this, mom, I need that, so they have to kind of grow up a little bit faster too, because my parenting has shifted with them. It was 2 of them, but it was just them and me. And so I was I had a strict routine. We sat down, we ate, we cleaned, we had a bath. Everything was very in tandem of how, every day was the same. But with Nyla, it really changes everything. And sometimes it's sad because we could have plans, right? I'm going to take you to Disneyland. Well, if Nyla wakes up and she's not feeling well, if I'm noticing that her arms are dusty, or if I'm noticing that she's like breathing too hard, then I have to say like, hey boys, like, I'm so sorry, we were going to do this today, but sister's not feeling well, like, and even just the way like you frame those statements to them, because they're two also children. And sometimes they feel like, well, we had plans, why are you not here today? Or why is this getting canceled? And so I just try to really pick how I explain things to them. I'm almost like overly compassionate towards them. And I feel like some people have tended to hold that against me. They feel like, oh, well, you baby your boys a lot, and it's really because I have almost lost my daughter several times. And so when I see that I'm making my boys feel sad because of, I'm not being there, or we have to cancel something, or they can't go somewhere, of course I want to make that up to them, as their mom. Yeah. And so I feel like my parenting with twins, it was kind of like survival of the fittest. I was just trying to make it through every single day and make sure I checked all the boxes, like we did this, we did that. But then I have this beautiful baby that has, a life-threatening condition. And so now I have shifted my parenting to like, obviously cherish every single day, but also try and make sure that all my kids are getting exactly like what they need from me, even as hard as that is,
Absolutely. And it sounds like you've done such a great job of, maybe it's a bit of trial and error, but figuring out what works with your children. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you've built a support system around yourself and what resources you use to help figure those kinds of things out?
Mm-hmm. Aside from my parents and my, I have a sister and a brother also who I'm super close with. And they've all just really rallied around Nyla and that. Aside from that, from the beginning, I knew that I needed like a community of other moms, parents, even grandmas, that have kids with congenital heart disease like Nyla does. And so like in Los Angeles, we have like an LA-based moms group for kids like mine. And the thing with congenital heart disease is like, it's different. It's so different from one kid to the next. Like nobody has like the same disease, if you will, but we all still share stories, whether that be like on Facebook or, other social platforms. Even there's a few that I even connect with via text message. Before the pandemic, we had like congenital heart awareness walks, stuff like that, that I've connected with other moms with. And that's really like my village that I have, because if I haven't gone through it yet with Nyla, they've kind of been through something like that or something similar. And then I have in turn learned that I should do that for them. And so I'm kind of playing both roles. Like I'm needing that support. And then I'm also being a supporter of others because I know how much it has helped us in our journey with her.
I'm hearing so many parts of what you're describing, right? Like through the journey of this, the hypervigilance and constant worry, which comes with parenting anyway, but multiplied times 1,000, in your context. And then the needing to like navigate everything between the siblings to make sure each of your kids' needs are met. There's a lot there. And so in addition to your village, I'm just sort of wondering, like, how do you take care of yourself through this? Because that is often, as we know, what gets lost in you doing all of the things for everybody in a situation that is changing sometimes every day.
Yeah. And if I'm being completely honest, Amanda, like I have not done a good job with self-care or taking care of myself at all. I suffer from really bad migraines. I have migraines, so many times during the month, probably like 10 to 14 days. And so I know a lot of that is like the anxiety and the worry that, I do carry. I did do like one-on-one personal therapy probably about a year and a half ago, right before Nyla was 2. She was going in for her pulmonary valve replacement. And I just like shattered to a million pieces because I knew, and I apologize if I'm going to get emotional, but
it's fine.
I've been talking about her all the time. And during that time, I remember telling my mom, like, I don't think I can like do it anymore, because I pride myself on being like super strong and like, don't worry, mom, like I got it. That's how my parents raised me. I mean, they raised me with plenty of love, but they also raised me with a mentality that don't worry, whatever happens, we're going to get through it. It can break us down to a zillion pieces, but you will get through it and we're all here for you. So the therapy that I did for probably about 3 to 6 months, and it was so hard to carve out that time. Like I lived in Orange County at the time. This was before the pandemic. And I remember just even feeling guilty, like driving 30 minutes to where I was driving to. But in that time when I would speak with my counselor, like I felt like, I could be raw and I can be real and I can let it out and then I can get great advice, and it made me feel better. I feel like it made me a lot more patient with my boys, because patience is also something that I struggle with a lot because I don't have time for that self-care, that you say, Amanda. I mean, none of us really,
No, right.
And so, I mean, I think during the pandemic, therapy hasn't really been that easy to come across, even online. I mean, you were stuck at home with kids. So how do you carve out that 30 minutes on a computer? But I have been doing better, even just little things, Amanda, like I'm sure you can relate. Like I get in the car and I'll tell my husband or my parents, whoever's helping me that day, like, give me 30 minutes to drive through like Coffee Bean. I'm going to turn on a podcast and I will be back in 30 minutes. And I feel like a new woman after that. I mean, it's nothing.
It is amazing. It can be right. Like 5 minutes. I think that's what's so hard, because I definitely get that. It's like, I'm even bad at self-care, right? Like it's one more thing to fit in, but it's that recognition that, right. It can be 5 minutes, 10 minutes of I just need a minute. Like I have nothing left to give to everybody else right now in this moment. And so I just need a second, but it's like learning to acknowledge and recognize that and lean on your village and fight those feelings of feeling guilty or selfish, like you said, for doing that, because it is the only way to sustain ourselves.
Yeah. And sometimes even I learned to do, like in the hospital, before this last time she was in the hospital, I think for 14 days. And because I'm like a veteran hospital mom now, like I knew what to pack to make me feel good. And it was like a form of self-care. The first time in the hospital, I didn't have nothing. I was miserable. The third time around, I had my favorite fuzzy socks. I had, my favorite snacks. I had travel size, like facial stuff. Like, it was just different. And even those little things really make all the difference when you feel like you're just,
I love that as an example, right? Like nobody ever thinks of that. It's all about, what do I need to pack for my child versus like, no, I need to be a warrior on this journey with her. And so what do I need to sustain me during those days too? I love those examples.
I didn't feel pressure to be like an advocate. I feel like I'm really in the infancy stages of being an advocate for my daughter and for her community. We call it a heart community, her heart sisters. That's kind of how we talk about the other little girls or heart brothers that, that are like her. I kind of just felt like also, I'm a journalist and writing is kind of who I am, not just what I do. And so I've always like journaled. I've always been like a parenting blogger since I think my boys were born premature. That's kind of when I started blogging for different sites. And so I kind of just like channeled all my feelings that way. And then that just kind of led to people saying like, oh, hey, like I saw this blog that you wrote, like, would you be willing to share, a little bit about Nyla's story with us? And so most recently, Nyla was selected as like a patient honoree for the Children's Hospital that she gets care at here. And then they asked me like, will you speak on her behalf? And so that was the first time I really said okay and did it. And it was so stressful. But for me, I just thought about it. And, a big thing in our CHD community is that a lot of moms, they don't know that their baby has a heart disease until the baby is born and is completely blue. And it's all hands on deck trying to save the baby, right after the baby's born. Thank God for us that I was able to find out because I was of advanced maternal age and there was like a special program, for older moms like me, so part of me speaking on her behalf was so that the hospital and, all the supporters understand that it's important that even younger women have access to that kind of a test because it could save so many babies, like it just blows my mind that that's not something that's offered or even mentioned to younger women because congenital heart diseases are so common and so many babies have them. So the advocacy in that respect is really important to me.
I appreciate you saying, I'm just at the beginning of this journey, because I also think that the advocacy takes different shape as, your kids get older, and it looks different. Like sometimes there's, advocacy with a capital A, like you're talking about, really advocating for systems change or policy change. Mm-hmm. But there's sometimes, little a advocacy we do too. And, I think about for my child that has had some medical issues and, when it came time for him to start school, needing to to advocate on his behalf and help teachers understand, this is why some of the behaviors are there. This is a part of his history, and it's important that you understand that, instead of sometimes what can happen, jumping to a label like, well, this is a, disruptive kid, or whatever the case might be. I think you don't stop advocating for your child. And you just may not even realize the times that you need to, because sometimes we want to be so careful to not like overstep or helicopter, but there are real times our kids need to help others understand these parts of their journey. And so I just think that the advocacy looks different at different stages of your child's life, and, your journey as a parent too.
Yeah. And even as my boys as siblings, I mentioned that they had just went back to school, they're in a public school, and I really had to like advocate for my family as a whole, because they wanted them in separate classrooms. It's the whole thing like, oh no, twins have to be separated, they can't be together. And it was a whole summer of me literally having to like get medical records and explain, like, I want them to go back in school, but I can't have them mixing with like 50 different children because I have another little baby at home, and it was just, the hoops I had to go through were really like disheartening. It also broke my heart that I had requested for them to have plexiglass like around. I mean, it's no longer a mandate in our classrooms here, but you can request them. So I did, my kids are in second grade, then they're boys, they're germy and they're gross sometimes. So I said, like, can we have that plexiglass, around it? And then I felt so bad yesterday because they came home and they're like, Mom, we are the only two people with plexiglass on our desk. Do you know how many questions we had to answer? Like, they asked us, like, are you guys sick? Like, why do you have that? And so, and I told my husband, did I do the wrong thing? Like, did I do the wrong thing by asking for that plexiglass? He's like, they'll get over it. Don't worry. It's fine. So
yeah,
we'll see how today went. Hopefully they didn't get too many questions. I don't know what can happen tomorrow. I mean, none of us do, right? Like, we can all get in our car and God forbid something happened to us. But I think just because she's a tiny little baby that I've known since before she even was born, that she has this huge battle that it's hard to sit with every day. Like, I'm not going to tell you that I have this like positive outlook and then I'm always like happy and like, I know we can do this. Like, it's really a roller coaster, right? Like, some days I look at her and I'm like, man, she's going to like conquer the world. She'll be the next Olympian. And other days I look at her and I just really like, I'll lay in bed with her and just watch her breathe all day long, And so, other things that I do is like, I have, favorite songs that I listen to in the car. Sometimes those songs will make me cry my eyes out. And you know what? Good. After that 8 minutes of just letting it out, I feel better. I feel like, okay, I let myself be in those like really dark places, but then I always make sure that I bring myself out of them, because I just feel like for me, that's what works. Like, I don't want to push things down. I don't want to be like, poor me, like, the sadness that I carry, I channel that into like prayer or like a positive vibe, like in my, and I speak it out loud, like, gosh, whoever like needs this prayer right now, whoever needs to feel like a virtual hug right now, or like whoever needs to feel like a piece of wind go by their face right now and just know that everything's going to be okay. Like, send this to them, And so that's just something that I've done. I think I really started doing it during the pandemic because I just felt so much anxiety, and I'm like, how can I just like let this go? Like, what could this transform into? And so that's kind of what I've transformed it into. And it really does help me. And I hope like whatever vibe whoever it's going to, I hope the vibe is going to someone that really needs it. And I hope it's not just me, spewing stuff into the air.
Oh, I think that is so important too, that you're acknowledging like, it's okay to be in the dark place for a bit. And when we go right to, it's okay, pull myself up, I'm so, I have to just be grateful. It's like, we also have to let ourselves, grieve whatever it is we need to grieve, feel all of the different things and work through them, as you've said, even if it takes you time, and to figure out, what is the way I'm going to channel this. As long as I find my way out of it, it is important to actually honor and experience those things and let yourself, be real about it. So I really appreciate you talking about that. Can you just add, because you mentioned it too, like, add on to this the layer of being a working parent also, right? So there's all of these challenges you've talked about, and this visceral desire to just wrap your arms around your child and keep her safe and not let the world in so that she is safe. And yet the realities of our lives are we have to work, we have to do all of these things. So can you talk a little bit about that, just what it's like being a working parent too?
Yeah, with her specifically, so when the twins were born, I stayed home for, I think, 2 years until I felt like they were easy enough, or not easy, but more manageable for my parents. And I didn't feel
it was like, do twins ever get easy? Because this I'd like to hear.
and then Nyla came, and it was hard for me because I had just gotten back to work. Yeah, I wasn't really planning on, another baby, let alone a baby with a disability or a medical condition. And so I was like at a crossroads. I'm like, what do I do? Do I have to give up my career? I went to school. I lived in different states trying to become a journalist and, follow my dream. And then I felt like I was getting it back a little. And then here I am with this big thing, in my lap. And so finding a job that was really flexible for me was really important, because I had tons of doctor appointments. And then I knew with her, it has to be somewhere where I can call and say like, hey, I can't be on the schedule like for 6 months. Like, I'll see you in 6 months. And so lucky for me that I found, a job that has been really accommodating and supportive of Nyla. But, even you can have the most supportive workplace or an employer ever. At some point, they're going to get tired of it, and maybe not get tired. There's a more proper word for that, but they're a company. They have needs also. They have to, they have certain hours and certain shifts that they need to do. I'm in the news business, so we're like 24-hour operation, everywhere that I work, it's like a 24-hour operation and breaking news. And, while it's sad that my daughter's sick, there's also a job that needs to get done. And so it was really hard. Like I felt guilty, when I would email my boss. I would read over the email a million times. Like, does it sound right? Could I say something else? Like, are they going to fire me? Are they going to let me go? Are they going to lay me off? It was just like a constant like stress, like another thing. And I was like holding on to it so tight. I felt like, I don't know if it was like a part of my identity that I didn't want to let go. I didn't want to just be a mom, because I felt like I had invested so much in myself, and I really enjoy working. And I would joke to my parents all the time and be like, I love to go to work and like enjoy my coffee and use the restroom in peace and have a 30-minute of lunch. Like, is that bad? Does that make me a terrible mother because I want that,
Right.
And then the pandemic made it really hard. Like, I mean, to this day, I'm still, looking at other options. I always keep my opportunities, like I try to keep them open, because for me, I have to, like, my family is always going to come first, my daughter and her health, my boys also. And it's just this big balancing, juggling act that I do every single day, where I'm trying to be a good mom and be a good, wife and help contribute to my family, hang on to my career, make my bosses happy. There's just so many elements to being a working mom. And I do feel like there's such a focus on like moms and what we're doing and what we can do. Even just last week, we had a big, meeting at work about returning to the workplace. And I was hoping another mom would hop on and be like, hey, I know we're supposed to come back on this day, but can we get a little more time? And no moms did. And it took everything in me to just let that fear go and turn on my camera. And I was like, hi, this is Nisha. I'm a working mom here, and I'm still not comfortable coming back yet to our newsroom. And what can we do, for fear that they're going to say like, oh, well, she's a mom, let's let her go. There's these 200 people here that aren't moms. They're not worried about coming back. They'll come back whenever we tell them to. So it's just so many things that you feel like you can't say how you really feel. And for me, I've just kind of learned what's going to happen is going to happen. Like I can't rack my brain and add to my already anxiety and stress by trying to like line up all the ducks and like see what's going to happen tomorrow at work or even with my daughter's condition. I kind of just have made like a really mental note and said, let's focus on what you can control, and what you can't control, like you have to let it go. And it's not easy at all, by all means. I don't think anybody will say that's easy. So I have to remind myself of that every single day, especially when I feel like the patient's running out with the kids, like the stress, like, the extra tears on that day. I just say like, Nisha, like one thing at a time, whatever you can do, you do, And so for work, Amanda, I'm doing my best. I'm trying my best to like balance it all out. Like, hopefully I can do a good job, but
yep.
I don't know, it's hard being a mom and working. There's no right answers. There's no formula for it. You kind of just have to go for it and see what happens.
Yeah. And so like with that, I resonate with so much of what you said, like in my bones. And I mean, I'm wondering too, like, what do you wish other people understood about what it is like to be a parent of a child with a disability?
I just wish they understood like the juggling act that you have to do. Like, there's all these balls in the air and I'm trying to keep them all up. What people don't understand is like, if they see my daughter and they think that she's just a healthy and normal 3-year-old child. She's running around. She looks great. She talks normal. She's normal for what people think, but they don't see that, she has trouble swallowing food. I had to do a swallow study for her. It took so long to even get on the phone with the hospital. And then you have to deal with like insurance companies, and they're not going to cover this test and they're not going to cover this blood sample. And there's so many behind the scenes things. And I feel like because I am a parent who's, I don't want to say like overly like active on social media. I mean, I pick and choose what I share of her, but I think that because I am open, people think that they know everything that's happening and they don't. And I appreciate that so many people like follow her journey and feel like they know her. Like that really, that makes me feel good. But there's still so many things like that people that have children with disabilities that they don't disclose. So don't assume that just because we're disclosing one part of what you see, there's not 10 other big factors that are in the background that we're not highlighting because it's not pretty and fun, and we don't want your comments on it, if that makes sense at all. It's just there's so many things, so many layers. She really has taught me so much. I feel like my personality has really evolved because of her. I feel things a lot deeper because of her, and not just sadness, like happiness too, mostly happiness and joy. She has taught me that it's okay for things not to be perfect, because prior to her coming, I prided myself really on like having a very clean house, very sharp looking little boys, down to like my purse being organized, like dumb everyday things that I shouldn't be spending time on. And now she has taught me that it's okay to just like break out in a dance party, like in the middle of the day, or it's okay that when I'm putting on my makeup, getting ready for work, it's okay for me to just put makeup on her or, give her the lip gloss and let it be all over. The other day she had crazy blue, like unibrow. And I was like, that was fantastic, Nyla, And so she really has taught me to kind of, I think, embrace like the inner child that I still have, because being a mom of a sick baby has made me like parts of me very hard and tough, right? Because I had to be that way. I don't like people to see me vulnerable. And she has showed me also that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to kind of go from one extreme to the other. And that's what she does. Sometimes she's super excited. Sometimes she's in a full-on tantrum, and that's okay, because that's how I feel like as a mom. I feel the same way, So she's definitely taught me that. And she's also has taught me that it's okay for me to look into the future. Like, her appointments are every 3 months. Now they're every 6 months. And I'm hoping, at some point, there are CHD patients like her where they're every year or every 5 years. And so I hope that at some point we can get to that, but we're not there yet. But she has also showed me, just by being so strong. I mean, every single surgery that she's had, it's amazing, her recovery. And I've said this like on social media before, but the nurses always say like, Nyla is the happiest baby. Like, she's so happy. She's so chatty. She's super sassy. I don't know where she gets that from, but she just has this like really big personality. And so she's taught me that even though, yes, it's not a secret that she's fighting a very big, ugly, disease within her heart, but it's not going to stop her, and that's what she showed me. She showed me like, Mom, like, even though she can't verbalize this, she has showed me in her actions and how she wakes up every single day so happy and so strong that she's going to be fine. And it's okay for me to look into the future, because that's what I was afraid of before, like I've said, I will hug her some days and just watch her sleep and watch her breathe. And so from seeing how resilient she's been and how strong she's been, I've learned from her that it's okay for me to plan next year with my boys, like plan a vacation for them, plan even, what she's going to be when she grows up. Like, that was a place that I never let my mind go to before. I didn't want to think about her 16th birthday or, her wedding day, even her first day of kindergarten. Like, I wouldn't think about that before. I would just totally block it out, and just seeing how much she's grown, how much better she's doing. Like, I've learned from her that it's okay for me to want that future for her and to look into the future for her. And even for her, you know, she's at this stage where she's very verbal, and now she's like, Mom, I'm going to do, you know, this, and this. And so it's just beautiful that she has kind of given me that perspective and that hope back in my heart, because it was really taken away for a long time. Like, I was afraid, really afraid. So she's made me a lot stronger.
Listening to these parents' ability to balance hope and honesty was so refreshing. Jennifer's right that there is no playbook, which can be scary but also empowering. We get to make our own. And I really appreciated Nisha's ability to acknowledge the importance of grief and growth, giving yourself permission to be in the dark, but then letting others in to help us find our way out of it. My deepest thanks to both of them for sharing their stories with us today. I hope this episode was the positive vibe, the virtual hug, the random gust of wind Nisha described that helps you know you're not alone. And there is a community of parents and caregivers out there who get it and who are fighting right alongside you to ensure that all of our kids are safe, healthy, and thriving.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Pandemic Parenting Podcast. Make sure to hit follow or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever platform you're listening on to be notified of future episodes. We'd also love to connect with you on social media. Look for our blue and yellow logo when you search Pandemic Parenting on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or YouTube, and you'll find us. Or follow the links in the show notes.
Let us know what you think of this episode by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Your 5-star review helps us move up the charts to reach even more parents and caregivers. If you have a specific question or topic you'd like us to address in a future episode, let us know. You can email info@pandemic-parent.org and mention podcast in the subject line.
And this podcast isn't all we do, by the way. Pandemic Parenting is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free science-based resources for parents and all who care for children while navigating the COVID-19 pandemic. To learn more about our organization and access our extensive library of webinars, videos, blogs, and more, visit www.pandemic-parent.org.
Lastly, this show wouldn't be possible without supporters like you. Lindsay and I donate our time to this podcast, but we do have an incredible team working behind the scenes to make this all happen. If you'd like to support the show beyond leaving your 5-star review, visit www.pandemic-parent.org/support and donate today.
Thanks for listening. Hope you can join us next time.